All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Becky Elliott. For those of you who don't know me, I think most of you do, but I see a few faces that may not know me. Uh, and this morning, we're giving our Lumina talks with table talk discussions. We have two talks. I'll be giving the first one, and my topic is on redesigning systems for human flourishing. And then after I give my talk, we'll have discussion at our tables. And then Sharia will come up and give her talk, and she is presenting on the topic of matriarchal structures and giving some examples of that and exploring that theme. And then we'll do more table talk discussion. And after that, we'll open it up. We'll come back up here and open up for some Q&A at the end, and then we'll be done. So let me get my iPad on here. I guess I'm up. So when I stepped into formal leadership roles, I noticed something strange happening in my body. In moments that required direction, instead of responding with clarity, I would get louder, faster, more rigid. My heart would start racing, not with confidence, but with anxiety. I felt like an imposter. I would present myself as decisive and certain, even when I wasn't. I thought leadership meant quick answers, confident direction, and a clear plan. But afterward, instead of seeing calm and confidence in my staff, I often saw confusion, sometimes even mirrored anxiety. Later, when I had time to reflect, I realized something important. I wasn't leading from who I actually am. I was performing a version of leadership that I thought was required. Confident meant loud. Authority meant certainty. Leadership meant having the plan before asking the questions. And I began to wonder, who decided that this is what leadership looks like? Once I started asking that question, I began noticing similar patterns everywhere. When women speak passionately, they're often described as emotional. When men do the same thing, they're described as confident. When someone needs time to process information, they may be seen as hesitant. When someone answers immediately, they're seen as sharp. Many LGBTQ plus people learn to scan a room for safety before they speak freely. Many neurodivergent people learn to mask how they naturally communicate or think. And people of color often navigate expectations or stereotypes that others never have to consider. In different ways, many of us learn to adjust ourselves to move through systems that were never designed with our full humanity in mind. And that raises a deeper question. What if the problem isn't that we don't measure up? What if the system itself is simply too narrow? And this is part of why conversations like this matter. During Women's History Month, we often pause to remember the women whose contributions were overlooked or whose voices were excluded from the stories we tell about history. Jake, you can put up my second slide. But it also invites us to ask a bigger question. Who was the modern world designed for? And who has been asked to adapt to it? When we begin asking that question honestly, we start to see how many of our systems we move through every day, our workplaces, our schools, our leadership structures, even our social expectations, were shaped around a fairly narrow picture of what a successful human life looks like. And that realization leads to the idea I want to explore this morning. We are designed for more than the narrow definitions of gender, productivity, and normalcy that our culture rewards. Human flourishing begins when we redesign our systems, our workplaces, our schools, our communities to reflect the full diversity of human experience. Okay, next slide. Every culture carries an unspoken template for what a normal human life looks like. The traits that are rewarded, trusted, and assumed. In modern Western culture, those traits often include speed, productivity, emotional restraint, decisiveness, and independence. Historically, that template has also centered people who were male, white, straight, and lost myself in my notes. White, straight, and neurotypical. Researchers across many fields, sociology, psychology, and gender studies, have shown many of the expectations we think of as natural are shaped by culture. Ideas like intersectionality remind us that systems of gender, race, and power often overlap in the way people experience opportunity and belonging. And the concept of neurodiversity reminds us that human minds naturally vary, even if our institutions often reward only one style of thinking, learning, or communicating. All of this points to a simple truth. Systems feel invisible when they work for you. They become visible when you have to adapt in order to belong. And we see this not only in workplaces and leadership expectations, but also in our schools where certain styles of learning, communication, and participation are rewarded while others are overlooked. So I want to invite you to consider something just for a moment. Think about a time when you felt pressure to adjust to something about yourself in order to fit into a space. Maybe at work, in school, in a community, or even in a family system. Maybe you spoke differently. Maybe you held back part of your identity. Maybe you worked harder to appear confident, calm, and capable. Many of us have had moments like that. Those moments can tell us something important. They often reveal where the system expects adaptation rather than making room for diversity. When people feel they must edit themselves to belong, it's worth asking whether the problem lies in the people or in the design of the system itself. Research in organizational psychology has shown something interesting. Studies led by social psychologist Alice Agley have found that when women display the same assertive behaviors as men, they are often evaluated more negatively. The behavior itself isn't different, but the expectations surrounding gender can shape how that behavior is interpreted. When systems only reward one way of being human, people learn to adapt. Women often learn to moderate their tone so they won't be labeled aggressive. LGBTQ plus people learn to scan spaces for safety before they fully express who they are. Neurodivergent individuals often learn to mask natural communication styles in order to appear professional or capable. Journalist and author Janara Nierenberg explores this in her book, Divergent Mind, where she describes how many women and gender diverse people with autism, ADHD, and other forms of neurodivergence go unnoticed for years because they become highly skilled at masking, learning to read social expectations and quietly adapt to them. I've thought a lot about this in the last few years. I didn't know anything about neurodivergence or masking until it began to show up in our own household. We've since been on a path of learning and discovery, and it's been great. Sometimes hard, but it's been great. Other forms of masking and adapting can show up for people of color when navigating stereotypes that shape how they are perceived before they even speak. And many men grow up learning that vulnerability is weakness rather than strength. The same system that asks women to be smaller often asks men to be tougher. It asks queer people to be invisible. And it asks neurodivergent people to be normal. Many people survive systems like this. Far fewer truly flourish. Sometimes we see this most clearly in education. When schools teach only one way to learn, many students grow up believing something is wrong with them, when in reality, the system was simply too narrow. When we notice these patterns, the solution we often hear is self-improvement. Try harder or hustle. Lean in. Be more resilient. But flourishing isn't about becoming better at performing someone else's definition of normal. Flourishing isn't about fixing people so they can fit the system. There's a short parable in the Gospel of Luke that has always stayed with me. In this story, a fig tree has been planted in a vineyard. For several years, it hasn't produced fruit, and the landowner becomes frustrated and says that it must be cut down. But the gardener offers a different perspective. Instead of blaming the tree, he says, give it more time. Let me dig around it. Let me cultivate the soil, take care of it. And the assumption shifts. Maybe the problem isn't that the tree is defective. Maybe the conditions simply haven't allowed it to flourish. Flourishing is about redesigning systems so more people can live into their full humanity. In the Christian tradition, we might describe this as being made in the image of God, or the Imago Dei. But whether we use religious language or the language of human rights, the underlying idea is similar. Human beings are inherently diverse. And if we are truly designed for more, to live into our full humanity, our institutions should reflect that diversity rather than restrict it. So what might redesigning systems actually look like? It might look like leadership that values listening and collaboration as much as decisiveness. Workplaces that recognize different communication styles and ways of processing information. Schools that recognize multiple ways of learning and thinking. Communities that make space for diverse identities, families, and ways of living. In my own experience, when I stopped trying to perform someone else's version of leadership and began leading from my own natural strengths, asking questions, slowing down, creating space for others, our team actually became stronger. Flourishing, it turns out, is not a limited resource. When more kinds of people are able to bring their full humanity into the world, the entire community becomes richer. Many of the systems we've inherited were built around a narrow picture of what a successful human life looks like. But human beings are far more diverse, creative, and relational than those systems allow. If we truly believe people are designed for more, then the work before us is not forcing people into smaller spaces. The work is redesigning the spaces themselves. Next slide. And that leads us to a question worth asking together. The question isn't whether people can adapt to the world we've built. The question is whether we're brave enough to build a world where everyone can truly flourish. And perhaps that begins by asking a different question altogether. Are we willing to examine the soil? Because sometimes what looks like a problem in the person is really a signal about the conditions surrounding them. And when we begin to change those conditions in our workplaces, our schools, and our communities, something remarkable can happen. People stop performing who they think they're supposed to be, and they begin to flourish as they actually are. So now I invite some discussion at your tables to reflect on that question, not just in theory, but in the real systems that we all move through every day. Our workplaces, our schools, our families, our communities. There's a few prompts that will show up on the screen. You don't need to get through all of them. Just look for the one that sparks for you or for your group. The goal isn't to solve everything today. It's just simply to notice where human flourishing might grow when we make a little more room for each other's full humanity.
Okay, everyone, let's bring it back. All right. Imagine you're in the foothills of the Himalayan mountains in China, in a community of about 40,000 people called the Mosul. Each household is ruled by the matriarch, and property is passed down through her line. Women take care of business matters, men take care of the animals. Couples do not live together. In fact, their language doesn't even have a word for husband or father. The men stay in their mother's house, and at night, women choose their partner by walking to his home. They go back to her house for the night, and he must leave by sunrise. Most couples practice serial monogamy, remaining exclusive partners until the relationship has run its course. Children remain with their mother, and often babies don't know who their father is. But of course, there's no stigma for this. It's just the way things are. Show of hands, how many of you would be comfortable with this arrangement? Maybe hold your hand up high for an enthusiastic, yeah. Maybe just a little bit for a, yeah, kinda, maybe. A little bit of it, yeah? Next, let's travel to Sumatra in Indonesia. In Minangkabau culture, land and family name pass from mother to daughter, and women make decisions for the family and community. Men take on religious and political roles, including the chief, but it's women who choose the chief and can remove him if they need to. One of their cultural beliefs is that the mother is the most important person in society, and society is arranged accordingly. When marriage occurs, partners have separate sleeping quarters. Some of this society is shaped by the men's need to travel for long periods for work, leaving the women behind to care for land and property. They argue that men can live anywhere, and so do not need a house like women do. Let's do another show of hands. How many of you would be comfortable with this arrangement? We got a little more enthusiasm on this one. How about Alabama, where 30 residents live in the... That wasn't the punchline. How about Alabama, where 30 residents live in the Alpine Village, initially formed as a lesbian community in Florida in the 1970s by gay rights and women's liberation activists. The Alpine Village is home to a diverse group of women who celebrate many spiritual paths and pursue a variety of outdoor activities. Men may be hired to work on the land, and community members may have men stay for a while, but no men live permanently in the village. Show of hands. If you want, sure. The Bribri Society in Costa Rica also passes on land and property along the matrilineal line. Only women are allowed to prepare traditional cacao drink used in sacred rituals, which gives women a spiritual authority. Women are also considered the keepers of culture, also passing down traditions to their daughters. Men still hold important roles in Bribri society, but they don't have the same authority as women. Show of hands. Okay, we got the most takers on this one so far. Finally, let's look at traditional Haudenosaunee culture of the northeastern United States. And I want to acknowledge that I use the past tense quite a lot in this sentence, or in this section. It's important to remember that Indigenous Americans still exist, and using the past tense can erase that. My use of the past tense here has to do with traditional living structures in their culture that are not practiced today because of the results of genocide. I try to use present tense when referring to this people's current life ways. The Haudenosaunee are made up of a confederacy of 6 tribes. The first Confederacy Council was facilitated by a woman, Jigansase, the Peace Queen, who helped the Peacemaker and Hiawatha unite the nations under the Great Law of Peace. This set the tone for a society in which women's authority is fundamental. Families are organized along the mother's line. Each clan lived in their own longhouse with the clan mother as its head. The clan mother's role involves political authority, caregiving, and cultural stewardship. She chooses the male chief who represents the clan at the Confederacy's Grand Council, so she must possess the wisdom to choose a good leader. The chief is accountable to the clan mother, and she may revoke his authority if he fails. Clan mothers play important roles in customs, keeping traditions alive. She decides when to hold important rituals and festivals and ensures that rituals are carried out properly according to tradition. All female descendants would live in her longhouse their entire lives and bring their husbands to live with them. Children raised in these longhouses were generally closer to the women than to the men, mostly because the men would be off hunting and trapping. Kids called their biological mother and their aunt's mother and considered their cousins to be siblings. Women typically handled village concerns like property and crops, while men handled hunting, fishing, and trade. Women controlled the economy in their nations because they were responsible for growing and distributing food. They also had final authority over land transfers and whether to engage in war. Haudenosaunee culture remains the oldest continuing pure democracy in the world because of their consensus-based decision-making. Show of hands. Okay, we got just about everybody this time. These are all examples of matriarchal societies that exist today. So at this point, I think it's helpful to define some terms. Let's start with patriarchy. Patriarchy is a social system where men hold primary power, dominating roles in political leadership, moral authority, social privilege, and control of property. Patriarchal systems often emphasize masculine traits, things like strength, assertiveness, and leadership. Men are typically expected to be the family unit's primary breadwinners, decision makers, and protectors. Typically, matriarchy is seen as the same thing, just with women in charge, where women hold most of the roles in leadership, have the most authority, benefit from social privilege, and control the most property. And it's understandable why most men wouldn't want to live that way. And it's worth the mention that in this framework, men don't want to receive the same treatment that women have been receiving for millennia, and maybe that should give us pause. A better understanding of matriarchy is given by Heidi Gottner-Abendroth, a matriarchy expert. She says, in matriarchy, mothers are at the center of culture without ruling over members of society. The aim is not to have power over others and over nature, but to follow maternal value, to nurture the natural, social, and cultural life based on mutual respect. Catherine Edsel, founder of Matriarch Adventures, which leads expeditions of women to observe elephant societies, which are also matriarchal, describes matriarchy saying, I don't see it as a society that oppresses men, more a society that values instinct as much as intellect, receptivity as much as assertiveness, collaboration as much as individualism, and empathy as much as objectivity. When you're in a meeting, whose voice gets heard? Does the team value listening as much as action? Cooperation as much as getting it right? When you notice a woman being dismissed or talked over, can you give her the floor back? How about at home? Whose voice gets heard? Matriarchal societies don't try to make men subordinate. They strive to be egalitarian, looking for solutions that benefit everyone. There's a lot of contentions over definitions of matriarchy and feminism, but if matriarchy means valuing receptivity and equality, it's important to listen beyond just white voices. In the introduction to her book, Hood Feminism, Mikki Kendall describes how white feminism has left a lot of women behind. She says, as debates over last names, body hair, and the best way to be a CEO have taken center stage in the discourse surrounding modern feminism, it's not difficult to see why some would be questioning the legitimacy of a women's movement that serves only the narrow interests of middle and upper class white women. While the problems facing marginalized women have only increased in intensity, somehow food insecurity, education, and healthcare are rarely touted as feminist issues. It is past time to make the conversation a nuanced, inclusive, and intersectional one that reflects the concerns of all women, not just a privileged few. Kendall goes on to describe how food security, housing, gun violence, and racism are all women's issues because they affect women. And we can't address the inequality faced by women if we're not willing to address these issues too. When we design to accommodate those with the greatest needs, everyone benefits. Kristen Godsey is a professor of Russian and East European studies and author of the book, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism. Her research for this book explored the experiences of everyday women in the post-World War II Eastern Bloc. While experiences varied from region to region, some general themes can be brought forward. In these planned economies, specific care was taken to ensure that the barriers to independence faced by women would be addressed, specifically those related to unpaid domestic labor. As I describe these options, try to imagine what that life would feel like. Firstly, women were a welcome part of the workforce and able to make their own income. So women were not necessarily dependent on marriage for survival. Instead, women were freed up to choose a partner or not, based on love and affection rather than transaction. When it came to childcare, paid parental leave was the norm. There was broad availability of creches and nursery schools to help care for neighborhood children from infants up to school age. Schools offered clubs and homework to help after school. This both accommodated parents' work hours and meant that time at home could be spent on enjoyable things rather than nagging your kids over their homework. Some countries offered loans to first-time homebuyers and would forgive some or all of the loan as the couple had children. Neighborhoods also had several milk bars, public cafeterias offering subsidized, so inexpensive, yet still nutritious food. Unlike going out to eat today, milk bars were an affordable option for families to enjoy regularly and not have to worry about the decision-making, cooking, and cleaning for dinner every night. Some communities tried initiatives for public laundries and mending cooperatives to further free up women's labor. Of course, Godsey recognizes that there were negative things about life in the Eastern Bloc too, things like secret police, repression, and censorship, and that shouldn't be ignored. It's also not unique to socialist states. But she challenges us to look at the social services that did work to inform the world we want to build. So what do we do now? How can we live as though the world we want already exists? Some answers happen at the household level. Who is responsible for what in your household? From planning to execution, who takes on what tasks that keep the household running? The book and card deck Fair Play by Eve Rodsky could be a great place to start and help you visualize who does what. From there, make decisions about whether this is how you want your household to function. It will look different for every family, but pay attention to who is taking on more stressful or unpleasant tasks. Some answers happen at the community level. Can our community take on the labor of a meal or two so that families, usually women, don't have to? Or maybe a few families have dinner together and each bring ingredients. Or a few families rotate who hosts dinner once or twice a week so that no one has to figure it out every day. These are all examples from our community. What could it look like to share responsibilities for childcare, for laundry, for errands, so that each individual family, and disproportionately the wife or mom, doesn't have to do it all alone? And finally, some solutions happen at the legislative level. What candidates support bills that actually help the average household? Are there any populations being left out? How can we address those inequalities? And can we scale up the changes we make at the community level to address the needs of those the state has left behind? Let's take some time at our tables to think through these questions. Come on back. Any questions for the whole group?
For the both of us. I think we just wanted to close it up with an opportunity for you to ask questions, for us to have a larger discussion. Any questions? Any thoughts? Comments?
Sure.
Yeah.
We ended up talking at our table about farming communities and how those were kind of communities where people would help each other out. And she had a good description of enterprise or and I grew up in Sherwood when it was farms, and people would literally have barn raising, and everyone would help out, or someone's animal would get out, and or someone's kid would wander off. So we've had community in farming kind of areas, and then but our suburban and cities get much more individualistic.
Would it be helpful to repeat that back in the mic? Okay. Yeah.
Oh, we're still.
Oh, are we still on?
We're still
We're
live.
still on. One of our guests was talking about how community showed up in farming communities and the way neighbors would take care of each other, barn raisings all done together, or if an animal got out, the whole community would help. And we've lost that in our suburban setups. Not super well, but the idea of a kibbutz, which is like a communal farm. Is it only in Israel? No, it doesn't have to be. But again, yeah, communal farms where people live together and work the land, and some people stay forever and some people stay for just a season. But another model of community.
Did you call that a kiblet?
Kibbutz?
Kibbutz. Like a kiblet. Kibbutz. Okay.
There's a couple of communities here in our Portland metro area that is similar to that, where you enter in. I know there's one in Washington too, where you enter in, like, and you don't necessarily own anything, but you live in true communal behavior. So everyone's sharing, nobody owns the property. It's like all community-based living. We have in suburbia, these suburbs, the way that they're designed, you're talking about systems that, are designed that you have to adapt to. That's one of the things that I thought of, that we have all of these suburban lifestyles that we've had to adapt to, that nobody really, like, even biologically and evolutionarily, are like, we're not built to adapt to, living in basically stick boxes that all look the same, right next to each other. We're built more to be like more free than that. We're built different.
So the comment for the microphone is that we've had to learn to adapt to live in stick boxes and individual homes, and that's not how we began as societies, and that's not how we're truly meant to be as communities, as humans, but we've had to shape ourselves into that mold.
I think there's a mental part, a psychological piece of suburban living. Like, I'm a 5-minute bike ride my house to here, to Kevin's, to Lindsay's house, wherever. But it's not my cul-de-sac, where when I was like at my uncle's farm, the next neighbor was a mile away, but that felt like nothing to just go there. There's nothing in between. There's no barrier other than like a fence for the cow. They go over the stile to. So the village is tighter, packed, but more segregated by the structure, by the streets, by the way of getting there. And you're crossing like traffic and whatever to go and do it.
And a 10 to 15 minute bike ride to your next neighbor's home felt like nothing because that's just what you do. And now, I mean, we can't imagine.
Yeah. So the comment was looking at how suburban setups affect us even psychologically. That when we have all of these houses and buildings packed tight together, that even that 5-minute bike ride feels longer and more dangerous than just the 10 to 15-minute bike ride that it would take to get to your farm neighbor.
We had a question over here.
As you're preparing, what was your biggest takeaway? What did you learn?
We're both just going to stare at each other while we think because we're both processors.
Want to repeat the next one?
Oh, yeah, repeat the question. That'll give us some time too. What was our biggest takeaways as we were preparing? And yeah, I think for me, getting to look at different examples of matriarchal cultures just kind of opened up the amount of possibilities that there are. And I think that part of the challenge when it comes to building a better world is that we need strong imaginations. And so when we find those things that can fuel our imaginations, then we can start to figure out how to do this.
I think one of the takeaways for me, and just in the process of reading through and researching and discovering resources, just finding story from other people who are figuring it out or are trying to make change in their own communities or in their own systems and settings. Just finding a book. I mean, even one book that really spoke to me, and I only had a chance to just get into the surface of it, but I'm excited to read her book, is Divergent Mind by Gennara Nirenberg. She's a CNN journalist, and just to start to read her story about, she didn't figure out that she was neurodivergent until she was an adult. And that is so common because women have to learn to mask in our settings and social structures because it has not in the past traditionally been assumed that women have autism or ADHD or other forms of neurodivergence. The research out there is not for women in the past. That's changing. But the challenge also with that change is resources for funding those research projects. A lot of that has been cut. And so how, can we continue to feed into that to support those causes that are trying to make change? And just to find the resources and stories that really connect to you, that really make a difference.
Yeah.
Do you have a definition for adaptation? I was reading that question and I couldn't honestly come up with, because look at me.
You haven't had to adapt in the same way.
I mean, yeah, I can stretch out there and find, okay, I had to move from a farm into a suburban nice house in Germany, right? So like, that's not real. To me, what I think about adaptation, like with how women have had to adapt, how people of color have had to adapt. Yeah, I'm a biracial family, so I've had to adapt. Now, in recent years, I've had to adapt. But it's just me as an individual. I'm white, I'm male, I'm 6'2". I match the MAGA aesthetic. Like honestly, like that's
You're
That's
a magazine and liberal.
So I just wonder, like, is there a formal definition of adaptation that you have found? Or just make up now, like what kind of definition?
I, so the question was, have we, have either
we
of us,
define
how do we define adaptation? I think that's a really good question that I think we're still learning more about, because we're more and more people are discovering those settings where they've had to adapt to fit the mold. And I think part of that is, and in some of my reading, it's where you have to make some sort of a change within how you are approaching a setting, a room, or a community, or a group of people where you're unsure, where you're having to mask and scan the room to make sure you're safe, or I think all of those different characteristics play into the different definition of adaptation in a human context. Do you have any thoughts?
I struggle with adapting. And I think that my response more often tends to be to leave or to shut down rather than have to adapt. And I think that's another thing that it could look like. Oh, we got two.
Just to throw a little wrench on that. I had a friend of a friend who was from the Eastern Bloc, and she came out to experience American life, and found out it was really, really hard because she had to work really hard. Back in the Eastern Bloc, she got shelter, she got food, and she got but that's for what she was after. So she actually came out here and said, you have to work so hard for these things here. I'm going to go back. She went back because those were all supplied to her. And she didn't have to work hard. So there is, a mindset that, we have to get over, or you have to work for it. Call it capitalism or whatever you want to call it. But there is a mindset that, is tough for someone.
Rich was talking about a friend who was from the Eastern Bloc, a woman, and came to the U.S. to visit and was just amazed at how hard you had to work to have basic necessities. And yeah, sometimes you decide that it's not worth it and you go back. Yeah.
I was going to say a gender-based adaptation. That's pretty many women experience. If a woman goes to buy a car, or you may possibly even just goes to the mechanic, they are treated very differently, not as well, and they pay a lot of money. So an adaptation a lot of women do, and I do, is you bring a male with you, and you have to step yourself back and let them be in charge. So that's like
Yep.
So the comment was that in some settings, women have learned to adapt by, for example, going to a car dealership or a mechanic
Hardware store.
or a hardware store, bringing a man with you as a buffer, really. Yeah.
Because at least they'll be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Any other comments, questions?
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.